Hello and welcome to the Microbiome Medics podcast. I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack.
And I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and we're your co-hosts.
We are both GPs and lifestyle medics with a shared passion for microbiome science. We'll be translating the evidence and packaging it into actionable, bite-sized chunks so that you can harness the power of the microbiome to improve your own health and that of your patients. So hello and a very warm welcome to another episode of Microbiome Medics. I am Dr. Siobhan McCormack, and today we have a fascinating topic for you, the oral microbiome. So joining me to discuss this subject is a leading expert in the field of oral microbiome research, Professor Egija Zaura from the Academic Centre of Dentistry in Amsterdam. Professor Zahra, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here today.
So let's get cracking. What is the oral microbiome and why should listeners care?
Well, I think if you give me time, I can keep talking now for hours. So please stop me when I'm But I think oral microbiome is most important microbiome of your body because that's actually where all the stuff enters your body. It goes through the mouth and these microbes are there to protect us. So imagine completely sterile mouth. We would be extremely sick people.
Wow. So there is so much for us to talk about here. So you're saying that the oral microbiome is the most important microbiome.
Well, no, you cannot. No. Gut is, of course, not secondary to oral. But I mean, you only hear about gut. And I would like to say, please don't forget oral, because if you don't have a good oral microbiome, you will get problems in the gut.
I suppose the oral microbiome is an extension of the gut microbiome. It's, if you think about the gastrointestinal tract going from the mouth to the anus, but we do concentrate on the gut microbiome in the colon area, which is the highest density of bacteria in that area. So how does the gut microbiome compare to the oral microbiome in terms of its density of microbes?
Well, it is very rich. It's actually very diverse, but there are a lot of microbes at different places in gastrointestinal tract. And most of them we cannot study. The oral microbes we can, because it's easy to access and to get them out and to put under microscope, like it was being done in the history. But oral microbes have hundreds of different species in the same mouse, and there are a lot of types estimated and not all have been identified, so we don't know much about them. And when I talk about microbes, actually most studied are bacteria, but there are a lot of fungi, a lot of archaea and viruses we know hardly anything about. So it's a huge wealth of microbes.
Yeah, well, you spoke about the historical context, and I think it's really fitting. I'm talking to you, a microbiome scientist from the Netherlands, because we could argue that's where microbiology started with the discovery of oral microbes. Can you tell the listeners a bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks for this. This is really nice because in the 17th century, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, who was Dutch, a very bright man, and he made his own first microscope, a simple microscopic lens, and he was playing with it. He took some pond water and looked under the lens and saw little animals moving. But he also took his dental plaque. So he scraped his plaque from his teeth and put under his lens, and he could see that in a little droplet of water, there were small things moving. He called them animalcules. So these little animals, he thought they were animals, but which were certainly bacteria, were moving around, and he was trying to kill them with vinegar. And when he was just flushing his mouth with vinegar, nothing happened. He couldn't kill these moving things. But when he removed this biofilm and dispersed it with vinegar outside of his mouth, then it showed that he could kill them. So that also showed the first nice principle of biofilm being protected from antimicrobial agents.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. So how did you get involved in oral microbiome research? What's your career journey to take you to this point?
Well, that's a very weird road I made. Actually, I wanted to become a general practitioner, but before I started my study, I thought I want to try myself. How am I doing it? Can I handle hospitals and all the blood? And I asked my cousin, who was a hospital doctor, to arrange a place that I can help in a hospital. And she said, oh, there was no place to help. So only place she could arrange was at a dental practice. And then I had this summer job. I was 15 and I was just helping this dentist. And I really was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And I could also already try little things in the mouths of patients, like assisting. And I loved it. So I said, okay, I'm going to be dentist. But I didn't think much about it. And when I was a dentistry student, I realized that it's a lot about handling things. So I was very good with my hands. And then I was thinking, yeah, so many people take good care of their teeth, but they still get cavities. So why is this happening? So I was more like worrying and thinking, how can we help these people than just filling, drilling and billing? So that's how I was searching for a place to do research. And I ended up in Amsterdam as a PhD student. And since then, I never left, because then I discovered that microbes actually have a crucial part in these oral diseases. And well, that's where I'm still there, almost after 30 years, still researching it.
Well, I know that the ecosystem of the oral cavity is, you're absolutely fascinated by that. So I want to help the listeners understand how incredible the oral cavity is. So we're going to do an Alice in Wonderland scenario. Imagine we drink a potion that shrinks us down to the size of a flea, and you and I hop into the mouth of some willing participant. I want you to shine your tiny spotlight on some of the structures in the mouth that maybe people don't think about.
Well, great exercise. Just one little side note. What age are we? Because when you are born, you don't have teeth, and then you get teeth. And then, of course, a lot of things change in your mouth. So when you take my spotlight and come with me into the oral cavity, it depends on what age I am. So imagine I'm just my own age and you come in, and then we are going there. We first have to pass the lips, which look like skin, but they're not. They have very specific structure. And just inside of our lips, we have a lot of salivary glands, so small glands which produce mucus, which makes our lips soft and moist. And then we also have, of course, teeth we have to pass, and they are in nice row, and some of them might have fillings, some not. And these teeth are covered first with a film from saliva. Saliva is the fluid basing the teeth and all the surfaces in the mouth. At Health, we have very rich saliva, and which is rich of a lot of proteins. It's actually the food source of all the microbes in the mouth. It comes from saliva. So this film of saliva allows bacteria and attach on these surfaces, on the teeth, and also on mucosa, so the cheek, the tongue, the palate. So it's all called mucosal surfaces, soft surfaces. These are very unique surfaces in our body, because it's the only surface which is hard and open to outside world. So that's also, like, for us hard, because we have to remove these things growing on them. Otherwise, there is no way teeth would get clean by itself. Our mucosal surfaces, so the cheeks, the palate, the tongue, do get clean by themselves, because these mucosal cells desquamate. They come off when they get older. So the new cells grow and they push away these bacteria. So that's how we keep our mouth clean. Okay, then we were traveling from the teeth. We actually fall down on the tongue, and tongue is really like a jungle. It's full with crypts, with papillas, with little valleys. And all these structures allow us to taste things. So it's full with taste buds. And these taste receptors are hidden in these structures. And for them to work, we need to have, again, saliva, which moistures them, but we also need bacteria. There's some research showing that to experience taste, you have to have good balance. And if your tongue is very thick coated with a thick, dark coating, then you also don't taste well, because it blocks these taste receptors. Well, what else do we have? Then if we go further, we have a throat. A throat, you have these tonsils. So that these lymphatic organs catching up bacteria or viruses, whatever comes into our body. That's our first line of defense from our immune system. Oh yeah, one thing I should have mentioned, next to the teeth, it's also a crevice. This crevice, that's the area where the gum meets the tooth. And in this crevice, also our immune system talks to us. So there are neutrophils, so immune cells coming out from our bloodstream. And the serum-like fluid comes there, which also feeds bacteria, but also protects us. It has a lot of antimicrobial substances. Just as saliva also has a lot of antimicrobial substances. So it all kind of keeps this mouth relatively clean, but still allows good bacteria to survive.
Wow, this is a really interesting way of viewing it, because we have this whole metropolis with these incredible craters and mountains and hills and saliva lakes, and it's much more complex than we think about it normally. So this is the biome. So now let's meet the microbes. Who's there? It's teeming with life, this metropolis. Tell us something about the bacteria in particular. That's what's being most researched to date.
Yeah, well, the bacteria are most researched, like I said already, from 17th century and back into 19th and 20th century. Already first cultures from oral microbes has been done, and people focused historically at these easily culturable microbes. So we know a lot about one type of microbe. It's called Streptococcus, and the Streptococcus grows easily in a lab. So that's why most of the decades until the molecular methods came, people thought about this quite simple system. Yes, you can culture it. There are, of course, also other bacteria you can culture, which grow in more difficult conditions. They don't grow under oxygen. So those are the ones which are also producing smelly products. You can smell them in the morning breath, or you can have them sitting in your tongue. And if you have this thick coating I just spoke about, then you could also smell these bacteria making these sulfur-rich products. So those are the ones we don't like to have in big quantities. But the healthy oral microbiome is usually having these pioneering communities. So the Streptococci, Actinomyces, so bacteria which attach to clean surfaces. And they really are not afraid of oxygen. But the older your biofilm in the mouth gets, the less oxygen there is. And then you can start to get these anaerobic microbes. Well, there are a lot of microbes we just discovered, like I said, through molecular techniques. There are some interesting ones which don't have proper names yet. Some are like endoparasites or symbiotic parasites. They live on top of other bacterium because their own genome is very small and they lack some enzymes to be on their own. So it's really fascinating how they manage this. And then, like I said, besides bacteria, we have also fungi. Fungi are much larger than bacteria, and they are eukaryotes. So they're like us. They have a cell nucleus. So they also behave differently. And they are there. They are in low numbers, but because of their larger size, they have relatively large niche in oral cavity. And they can become nasty if things change. So we call them opportunistic pathogens, like this Candida albicans can result in white thrush in the mouth. And then I also mentioned viruses. So of course you have viruses like SARS-CoV we all experience, or all kinds of other viruses which are less dangerous for your own health. They infect our cells, human cells, but the majority of viruses in oral cavity actually are bacterial viruses we call bacteriophages. And that's the really tip of the iceberg. We know very little what their role is in maintaining healthy oral cavity. So the first studies are popping up, and it's really exciting area. So I'm looking forward to learn more about those.
That's very interesting. When you were talking about SARS-CoV and its effect, people will remember the reduction in taste and smell associated with that infection. Do we know anything about that in terms of the microbiome?
Well, there are studies who've looked at differences in people who got COVID and didn't. I don't know exact outcomes, but I know that there were some differences, but those are small-scale studies. And regarding the taste, I think it's more neurological effects of the SARS virus and not so much via microbes. But nobody actually looked at it together, like neurological plus microbial effects. So maybe there is some synergy.
So going back to this idea, I'm sure it was the same at when you were studying to be a dentist as when I was studying to be a doctor, this germ theory of disease, that all microbes are bad and that you have to get rid of them. And that's certainly something that seems very predominant in dentistry, this idea that you have to get rid of microbes and give broad spectrum antibiotics. How can we change the information people are getting about that? What is the balance? Because clearly there are potential pathogens that can infect the body. What's the sort of percentages? Are most of the microbes in the mouth either neutral or beneficial, or what do we know about the diversity?
Well, it's an excellent topic, and I think you're absolutely right. I also remember the time when I was a student, and we were really drilled that it has to be meticulously clean and microbes should be removed, and definitely young moms shouldn't get these very aggressive bacteria which produce a lot of acids, so that your kid doesn't get it. And that's how also I try to raise up my kids, meticulously avoiding contact with them because I didn't want to spread my microbes. Now we know that these microbes are essential also for kids, for mom passing them to kids to have them. So yes, how do we convince people that they should take care of these microbes? I think we should spread the word about importance of microbial balance. And your question about what proportion is unbalanced or unhealthy for us. When we are healthy, they're all healthy. So also the ones which produce these smelly compounds, they are there because of their function. They break down proteins, and some other bacteria can use these amino acids for their own growth. So if they're in low numbers, they are commensals. They just belong there. Yes, because it should be as rich as possible, this community. So it's like a rainforest. You have different layers, and they all need this ecosystem needs to be diverse to be sustainable. So that's why we don't call them pathogens when they are very low numbers. And when they take overhand and increase and really start to rule the ecosystem, then of course we lose the balance. So that's what we call dysbiotic ecosystem. And then indeed, it's too late already to talk about healthy microbiome. Yeah, so I don't see them as pathogens at all.
So there's this complex, sort of beautiful, diverse Amazonian rainforest that we have in our mouth that we need to look after because it's got huge benefits for us. So what do the microbes, these beneficial microbes, eat? You mentioned saliva. Is that where all their nutrients come from?
So that's actually their main nutrient source, and it's very rich, and they grow happily on that. And another source is this fluid seeping out through this crevice. So serum-like fluid coming from our blood through the gingival crevice, so the area next to the gum and the tooth. So there's this fluid which is rich with proteins, and these proteolytic or protein-loving bacteria really consume that. They prefer that to saliva. And then, of course, we, due to our own diet, have trained our microbes to extract sugars very quickly from what we eat. So they can also consume sucrose if we eat a lot of sucrose-rich products. So they can use that for the energy, which is not for the good balance of your microbes. Definitely not.
So just going to the subject of saliva, which I've become fascinated with, there's so many functions of saliva. I wonder if you've mentioned a couple. One is providing nutrients for these beneficial microbes. And you also mentioned it contains antimicrobial peptides. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the functions of saliva?
Well, imagine not having saliva, waking up, dry mouth, and the mouth doesn't wet. So that day you will be horribly experiencing horrible day because you won't be able to talk. You won't be able to swallow. You won't be able to communicate and laugh. It's going to be painful. You start to get cracks in the sides of your lips. It's just very, very unpleasant condition. And there are a lot of people having dry mouth. So from that, we learned that consequences of not having saliva at all are huge also to your oral health. So what we see, these people get cavities very quickly because the saliva also protects our teeth from losing mineral. Saliva is rich with calcium and phosphate, and those are minerals which need to be balanced back into your tooth enamel so that you don't get a cavity. And with lack of saliva, we do see this happening very quickly. We see it with people who have medication, like most medications which are for blood pressure reduction. They also have a side effect of inducing dry mouth. And then we see that these people have these poor health outcomes. The same happens people who have radiation for head and neck cancers. They also have damaged salivary glands, and we see these effects. You get bad breath if you don't have saliva. Saliva keeps all these bacteria in low numbers, like you said, with antimicrobial substances, but also saliva has properties to agglutinate, meaning to co-aggregate bacteria with each other in bigger clumps, and that helps swallowing them. So we swallow these clumps of bacteria, and it's not to seed the gut, it's just to pass it to the stomach, and they will die in stomach in this very acidic environment of stomach. So that's how saliva helps to clear the stuff out of our mouth.
So going on to another thing you mentioned, what is a biofilm?
Yeah, well, biofilms are everywhere. No microbes live flushing around somewhere freely. Maybe in some extreme environments, temporarily in sea, but usually microbes prefer sitting on a surface somewhere and growing together. So that's what makes them a biofilm, growing on a surface. And everything in our body, also on our skin, you don't see it, but there is a tiny biofilm of microbes, but you do see it in the mouth. So if you don't brush for a couple of days, you can see this white layer on your teeth. So that's definitely a biofilm, but we spoke about Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. He saw it and he removed it. So that's the layer with bacteria, with fungi, with all the microbes embedded in slime they make themselves. The slime protects them from being removed, from being dried out, protects them from antimicrobial agents. So that's why they are being killed easily if you remove this film and disperse. But if you keep it on a tooth and try to kill, well, nothing much happens.
So is it a sort of 3D structure, a net that the microorganisms attach to?
Well, it's actually even more complex. There are recently very beautiful images made from a group at Forsyth Institute. They use a microscopy technique called Classifish, and it's a 3D technique, confocal microscope, and you can see in different colors how different individual bacteria are structured. And what it shows, for instance, on a tongue, when you have these little papilla, like tiny thread structures of your own mucosal cells. And but they've shown that these bacteria form nice layers around these structures, and they attach in really beautiful structures, and suggesting that it has a function, that some bacteria need to sit together to help each other, to break down different nutrients, get from each other so they communicate. That's also known that bacteria in biofilm communicate with each other. It's called quorum sensing. So they really talk. They're quite smart creatures. And with these molecules, they influence also how they respond to the environment.
So it's very similar to our social structures. We don't survive living alone. We gather into villages and we cross feed and help each other and, chat to each other, and then also chat to cities further away. But
definitely, it's been coined quite some years ago that biofilms are cities of microbes. It's really city with the networks, with everything. So a complex city.
It's fascinating. So biofilms can be a positive aspect. So what is plaque? Is that a type of biofilm, or when does biofilm become plaque?
Well, it is a biofilm, certainly. And it becomes a biofilm already from the first hours when you brush your teeth. Then immediately already this protein-rich film based on saliva proteins will attach on your tooth. And bacteria will have receptors, again, to attach on this protein film. And that will happen within a couple of hours. And the first ones attached there, they will start growing in about 4 hours. But new layers come there, and they keep growing all simultaneously. So you will have a really visible biofilm by the end of the day with your eye. But of course, microscopically, it's there already at the beginning.
So what is, when we're talking about the dental plaque, which maybe some of the listeners will recognize, you go and see your dentist and have it removed, which is a kind of, a white, more solid substance that's thought to be negative for your dental health?
Well, that's because it's thick and mature plaque. Yes, if we don't brush it very properly, and there are places which are very difficult to reach by just brushing, so it stays there and it can become hard and it becomes dental calculus, and that one we cannot remove ourselves. So then you have to go to dental professional or oral hygienist, and that's being then professionally removed. But basically, this soft substance, dental plaque, we should be able to remove ourselves if our mouth is healthy. If we are unhealthy, meaning that we have already these, we call them pockets, periodontal pockets. That's already the damaged tissue around the tooth. And toothbrush doesn't go into this pocket. So it's very difficult to clean that by yourself.
And is that a space where these potential pathogens can aggregate and grow?
Oh, yeah, they love that. They love it because that's fluid I was talking about, the serum-like fluid. It really flows like a sea there when you have inflammation, when these gums are inflamed, and these bacteria are having a party there, indeed.
So it's always a food source, a sort of free wine spilling from the gums, if you like. So you get these pathogens tracking down to those areas where there's high concentrations of these nutrients.
Yes.
Okay, so what do we know we struggle with the gut microbiome in terms of what a healthy gut microbiome looks like? Is that the same with the oral microbiome? Do we know what a healthy oral microbiome looks like?
No, that's a $1 million question. No, we still don't know. And that's actually what I'm trying to research in all my research career. I think we know so much about disease. We know which microbes we don't want to have there. But what makes the remaining ones healthy, we are just starting to scratch the surface. It's the same like with the gut. There is no one straight recipe. What we've done, we've addressed it in a cohort of young, healthy volunteers. They were meticulously checked, their oral health, their general health, and it appeared that we thought we could frame and make like this is how the healthy microbiome looks. But it appeared that there were several groups, like subdivisions. We clustered them in 5 different types of microbiomes. So I think it's not like one size fits all. Depending on your genome or your saliva properties, those determine also which microbes will like you and which won't. That's why we see this heterogeneity. You can have a healthy microbiome, but very different from my microbiome. So that makes it difficult for all these microbiome studies to say what is then a healthy microbiome. So I think we shouldn't just be looking at what is there, but what are they doing, about which functions they're able to perform, and that these functions together make it a healthy balance with what you as a host need to have.
So if we go back to our city analogy, it would be the same that we couldn't say what a healthy, thriving city was just by listing the people who live there. It's more the activities and what they're producing and what they're manufacturing. And one city could be equally flourishing, but have very different inhabitants. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I love this allegory. Yeah, I really like it. So exactly. So just having a name doesn't mean anything. Like I mentioned, the streptococci, if you have the name, what's in the name? Because we know there are hundreds of different varieties of streptococci, and some are quite virulent, meaning can harm us, and some have so perfect beneficial capacities. They're protecting us from intruders. So you cannot just put them all one heap.
And it's also that idea you were saying of balance, that we can cope with a few potential pathogens if they're kept in check. They may even be beneficial in small numbers, but if they grow, get out of control and the balance, so you have more potential pathogens than beneficial microbes, is it correct to say that's when you have this problem if you're out of balance?
Yes, that's what we call dysbiosis. Also, that is still something we cannot define properly yet. So when is this tipping point? When do you enter dysbiosis? So we're also doing research currently on that. But for that, you need really long-term studies and to take a lot of samples in time and see how it changes in people who stay healthy or people who lose their health. So that takes a lot of effort.
So what are the most common oral diseases that people think about? And are they all caused by microbes?
Let me think. Dental caries, you cannot say it's a microbial disease. We don't call it infectious disease because we don't think that there are specific microbes. And also, if you only have microbes and nothing else, you won't get cavities. You do need to have sugar. So you do need to have this source of energy for bacteria to produce these acids. And these acids are the ones which make cavities. So yes, so that would be definitely oral disease where microbes are involved. Then you have another one, which is bad breath, or we call it halitosis. I already mentioned that. We have these anaerobic bacteria which produce sulfur-containing compounds, and they're very, very smelly. Think of like a rotten egg smell. So that kind of compounds, and yes, they make those in our oral cavity. And then one really, really common disease, and which has a lot of general health consequences, is this periodontal disease. And in old times, it used to also be seen as an infectious disease, that certain microbes do it, and now we know better. But it's actually the host, so it's our body overreacting in a strange way to this microbial stimulus. And it's also genetically determined. So not everybody will have this disease, but people who are susceptible, they will respond to this biofilm, and they will respond in a very different way than a person who is not susceptible. And there are a lot of factors contributing. So besides this host response, besides microbes, it's also the lifestyle. So periodontal disease risk is much higher if you smoke, if you eat unhealthy. So all this piles up. And if you have a lot of stress, so a lot of factors contribute to this disease. So we don't call it microbial disease. But yes, if you didn't have a biofilm, if you have, then again, this body didn't have anything to fight with. So yeah, then you didn't have the periodontal disease, I think.
So when we talk about the gut, it's the largest surface area between us and the outside world and imminent pathogens and dangers. And the mouth is the first portal, as you said. So it seems incredibly important that you have a good immune system there. In the gut, we talk about there being a one layer of cells between us and the outside world. I know we have mucus on top as well. So how does that work in the mouth? Is it the same? Is there one layer of cells? And what protects us from these things that we're eating and inhaling all the time from getting into the body and causing havoc?
Well, it's different than the gut because we don't have this one layer thing, and also the mucus layer is different. The cells are different. Like I said, it's this desquamation, so that these cells really go quickly. They leave the top layer of this mucus, and that mucous membrane. So that way you clear the whatever was sitting there and torturing you. It's just gone. Oral cavity, if you have a wound, it heals much faster than when you have a wound on your skin. And that's because of these properties of saliva. It has a lot of things which help wound healing. So that also protects us. The swallowing, like I said, so you swallow it and then they are destroyed in the stomach acid. So all these systems work together. And most importantly, if you have your own microbes already sitting on all these places in your oral cavity, so whatever comes in and it's not human and it's not oral will be fought against. So it will be destroyed. There is a full warfare, both from microbes and from your immune system. So microbes sitting there will make sure the conditions are unfriendly for the ones coming in.
Okay, so it's like boots on the ground. So they're taking up space and nutrients. And okay. So most listeners will be familiar with this idea of oral bacteria and dental decay, but many may be surprised about the connection between oral health and diseases further away. Can you give us an overview of the key research areas and evidence for systemic disease and the oral microbiome?
Well, that's a really hot topic already for decades, and it's also a difficult one. There is certainly association. The difficulty is in causality. It's like the chicken and egg story, like what was first, poor oral health and then influence on your systemic health, or was it already something systemic, and that's why you see the effects in oral cavity. Where we're really sure, but based on epidemiological studies, meaning that you look at large groups of patients and you see what diseases they have and which correlate, we do see a very strong correlation with this periodontal disease, so this destruction in your gums and also the dental bone, with diseases such as diabetes, and then high blood pressure and other cardiovascular diseases. There is also a relation with rheumatoid arthritis, relation with Alzheimer's disease, relation with pregnancy complications. So those are the studies where we know the numbers. You have more disease in oral cavity, you see more of these complications. The question is, like I said, what did what? And those are difficult ones. But we do see, for instance, in pregnancy complications, that when there is premature birth or stillbirth or preeclampsia, we see that there are oral microbes found in placentas. And those are not the oral microbes which are health associated. Those are the ones coming from these deep pockets, coming from these areas with inflammation. And the idea is that it happens through bloodstream because when you have inflammation in oral cavity, it's actually the whole body is responding to that. And with all these diseases I just mentioned, the common factor is chronic inflammation. And this inflammation in the gums, it's the same. It's chronic, it's invisible to the eye, it's below the gum line, but your body has to respond to it. So we do measure, we see that people with this inflammation in the mouth has, for instance, high concentration of C-reactive protein in their blood, which is protein showing that somewhere there is inflammation. And when you treat the gum, this value goes down. So your body kind of relaxes. So what I think the link with these diseases is that they just have common mechanisms. So that's why they co-occur. And if you treat one, it will also have a better effect on the other disease, because this inflammation, of course, your body doesn't care where it is, it just fights it. And that's what you then feel as a person. There is evidence that, for instance, when you treat oral cavity and you are a diabetes patient with poor diabetic or glycemic control, studies shown that when you treat periodontal disease, these glycemic control parameters improve just by treating oral cavity. So definitely there is link from both sides. So either systemically you can treat or orally, these are definitely linked.
So I understand, Professor, about the low-grade inflammation. So if you have potential pathogens triggering your immune system anywhere, then you will get a sort of systemic response all over. But that to me is slightly different from bacteria from the oral cavity entering the circulation and traveling to other places. Now, you mentioned one example, which is premature births, so traveling to the sort of placenta. And I know I read a paper, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, I think Malawi has one of the highest rates of preterm deliveries. And I think someone did some research where they tried to improve oral hygiene of pregnant women there, and they actually reduced the number of premature deliveries. What's actually happening there? Are bacteria going to the placenta? Do we know what exactly is going on?
It's a huge debate about that. We also contributed in researching that. There are a lot of papers showing that also in healthy pregnancies, bacteria are found in placenta. The question is, why are they going there and what are they doing there? And most interestingly, the first paper on that was published by Kirsty Agard in 2014 already. And I was here listening to her presentation at a conference. And then I came back and I was like talking to my colleagues, because the most amazing thing she presented was that she found that in these healthy pregnancies, the placenta contained microbiome which resembled that of the tongue and tonsils, and not any of the organs in a near neighborhood of placenta. And so then we were puzzling and sitting like, why would oral bacteria go there at a healthy state? What would be the physiological role of that? And we wrote a hypothesis paper, which shown that some studies later on showed that, yes, indeed, this might be true, on animal studies at least showing. And our hypothesis was that, most women, when they are pregnant, experience something called pregnancy gingivitis, that your gums are swollen. Even if you are doing your best and brushing your teeth, you still have swollen gums. And why are they swollen? It's because in our gums, there are receptors for the hormones, for the sexual hormones. And these hormones are, of course, having an enormous peak during pregnancy. And due to these hormonal effects, so this swelling of your gums allows actually microbes from this crevice next to the tooth and the gum allows these microbes to get into the bloodstream. Because what is swelling? Swelling is opening the blood vessel and getting wider. So we think it's a natural physiological way for these oral bacteria to be allowed to pick up, and they go to the organ which is developing most at that time, which is placenta, growing very hard. And they are trapped there. They're not there to inoculate or infect the child. They're trapped there. They're probably not living. They might be only bacterial fragments. And what we think, they are there for fetal immune system already to sniffle around and to acquire genetic information about these microbes of mom. So, okay, my mom had these, so this is probably good for me too, so that your microbial acquiring microbes in your first day happens in a safe way, that your newly established immune system already recognizes what is good and what's not good for you. That's a theory, and we're waiting for exciting experiments to show that is it this way or not. But that would explain why these oral bacteria are allowed to travel all the way there, and why do we get these swollen gums. On a side note, this also would mean that it's extremely important to have a really, really good oral health when you are expecting mom, because you want your kids, your fetus, to experience good microbes and not the ones which are going to be harmful later. So that's why also these complications, pregnancy complications, like as I said, having these bad bugs going all the way to placenta, you don't want those there.
You also mentioned dementia, and I know that you co-authored a review about the oral microbiome and Alzheimer's disease, I think. What's happening in this area? Are we again talking about specific bacteria, and are they crossing the blood-brain barrier? And what's happening there? I mean, it sounds fascinating, and I know they've actually found specific bacteria in cerebral spinal fluid, so in brain tissue. Tell us more about this.
Well, it's another exciting topic of research, but like I said, again, the causality, it's very vague. The studies that you mentioned, they actually find oral bacteria in fluid, in brains and in cerebrovascular fluid of people who have deceased from Alzheimer's disease. So these people didn't have healthy barrier, anything. They already had, most things were deteriorating. So when you find strange things in the brain of very, very ill people after their death, the question is, were there things there because already nothing was functioning properly? Or were they there at the first place and did they cause the disease? We don't know that. So there's a lot of research going on, a lot of animal research showing, yes, that oral bacteria can produce structures which resemble these plaques in Alzheimer patient brain. But is this really the way happening that way also in human brain and in the time of the disease course? Because it takes years. And when you find these organisms there at the end stage is the question, what were they doing there all the time? They cannot grow there. They're in very low numbers. So it's not very convincing that their role is in initiating disease. But yes, there is again association with dementia and poor oral health. And there are explanations. For instance, if you lack your teeth because of the poor oral health and your teeth has been extracted, you cannot chew properly. So you tend to eat more soft foods. And there's research done that if you don't chew, you don't train the muscles. The chewing muscles are really very lazy. And not chewing will make you cognitively go a little bit backwards. We see it in elderly. If they are in elderly homes, eat only the soft foods, their cognitive health declines compared to ones who are chewing healthy foods. So it's all connected. So this general thing that oral cavity needs to function properly affects your well-being, including your mental health.
That's fascinating because there's a lot about resistance training and cognitive health and how important it is. But I have never thought about the masseter muscles, which are your jaw muscles, as being part of resistance training, if you like, that it's a muscle workout.
It is. And people forget about it. People think, oh, I can only sit in a wheelchair. I can do anything. No, you can chew.
Wow, that's very interesting. So, just going back to the dementia aspects, so they have found, I think it was P. gingivalis, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and was found in these fluids or in brain tissue. They mentioned something called gingipanes. What are those, and what do they mean?
Yeah, those are proteases. Those are enzymes which can cleave proteins. So these proteases help this bacterium to survive in strange environments, and that's why it can go into cells. So this, how does it do it? By passing the blood-brain barrier. We don't have evidence that it's able to do it. Like I said, we do find these bacteria, but then the blood-brain barrier was not functioning well anymore. But these gingipanes have special talents, yes.
Would you get bacteria in healthy brains, as far as we know?
No, we don't have evidence for that.
So just moving on, because I have a list, people were so fascinated by this topic, Professor Zahra, and I have a list as long as your arm of questions. I'm just going to pick a few. If we just start with one that was very popular about biotics, so prebiotics and probiotics for oral microbiome health. I wonder if you could just outline what those terms mean and what the evidence is for using them.
Well, probiotics are bacteria beneficial for our health. So for whatever health, it could be gut health, mental health, oral health. And prebiotics are substances which allow these beneficial bacteria to grow happily. So for the oral cavity, we can use both pre and probiotics. There's less research done compared to the gut pre and probiotic research. Most probiotics, so bacteria for good health, actually are gut bacteria, meaning that, well, we are using the bacteria in oral cavity, which maybe do the best job in the gut, but not in oral cavity. So there's still plenty of work to do to develop better probiotics specifically designed for oral health. But there are advanced studies already.
Toothpaste, for example, there's a huge range of prices with toothpaste. Would it be correct to say, I mean, some people use just salt and water. I mean, I know there's controversies about fluoride at the moment. What are your views on toothpaste choice and the oral microbiome, if there are any views?
Yeah, the great advantage of toothpaste is that we can add substances there which we think which definitely help, which work in the westernized society where we eat unhealthy, where we eat a lot of sugars. So that's why we do put fluoride in toothpaste, because fluoride is shown really to help preventing these cavities. If you eat healthy, you don't need fluoride, but hardly anyone manages to survive without any snacks. So yes, you can keep brushing just with salt solution, just with plain water, as long as you brush, because mechanical removal of this biofilm helps already, but you cannot get with your brush everywhere. So the reason that we use toothpaste is that it has substances which can stay there and do their work after you've brushed. So it will stick to the remaining biofilm and still do the work.
What about mouthwashes? There's been a lot of negative views on mouthwashes and the oral microbiome. Could you explain those to us?
Again, it depends what's in the mouthwash. What's the aim of manufacturer for that particular mouthwash? If you see mouthwashes which are there with fluoride, like supporting teenagers who have orthodontic braces and they have difficulties with getting with toothbrush everywhere to remove this biofilm, then rinsing with fluoride containing mouthwash helps to prevent these white spots or lesions next to the braces. So that's perfectly safe. Then you have mouthwashes which are claimed that they kill 99% of all bacteria. I would really not advise using those if you have no issues with your oral cavity. If your dental professional suggests that you should use mouthwash, then discuss which one is most suitable for you, because just choosing something very aggressive means that 99% killing means all your good bugs will be killed first, because they are there in superficial layers, so you will kill those. And these deep crypts, deep pockets with these less beneficial bacteria will still stay there because mouthwash doesn't get there.
So I was particularly interested in this idea of nitrates and oral health and systemic health. So there are these bacteria, you may have to explain to me, that if you use mouthwashes and you're removing them, these bacteria that can transfer nitrates in food to nitrites. Can you explain to the listeners what that's about and how it could affect your blood pressure?
Well, it's a really elegant story how our co-evolution with microbes made it happen that we have benefit from these microbes. So what we eat, if we eat healthy, a lot of foods like green leafy vegetables, red beets, they contain a lot of nitrate. And nitrate is a molecule which in our body should be reduced to nitrite. And from nitrites, a nitric oxide is being made. And this nitric oxide has a lot of physiological roles. One of them you mentioned, regulating blood pressure. So in presence of nitric oxide, your blood vessels relax, and that leads to reduction of your blood pressure. But it has many other functions. So it's really a nice physiologically beneficial molecule. The problem with our body is that we lack enzymes which do the first step. From this dietary nitrate, needs to be reduced into nitrite. We cannot do it. We are handicapped. But these microbes in our oral cavity can. And why oral cavity and why not the gut? Because the next step happens into the stomach. So the reduction of nitrite into nitric oxide happens in this low pH conditions of your stomach. That's why gut bacteria don't have a chance to do anything about it. It has to happen in the mouth. But then, again, you would wonder, do I have to sit with this red beet or spinach in my mouth for half an hour and chew and chew and chew so that these bacteria can reduce it? No, even that is not necessary. You can just swallow. And what happens, we call it enterosalivary pathway. So you swallow the food, it goes into the gut, and then into the intestines, this nitrate is being absorbed into your blood. Blood brings it to your salivary glands, and then it is actually concentrated back into saliva. You get your nitrate in saliva coming through your gut, through your blood, back to mouth. And then when you're doing something completely else, your oral microbes can peacefully just reduce the nitrate into nitrite.
This is astonishing. So you're saying when I'm swallowing my beetroot soup, which is high in nitrates, I swallow it into my stomach, it goes into my intestine, gets reabsorbed in the circulation and goes back to the salivary glands, is resecreted into the mouth, and the oral microbes chemically modify it further.
Yes, and that's how you produce this nitric oxide, which you need in your body.
So this nitric oxide increase has health benefits such as it reduces my blood pressure, will reduce my platelet stickiness, it will improve my blood vessel wall, flexibility. So all these brilliant things, my cardiovascular system, all that can come from beetroot and the gut to the oral microbes. I mean, that's incredible.
Yes, even more important that not just beetroot. You can keep eating a lot of healthy things, but if your mouth doesn't contain these microbes who can do that, so exceptionally these healthy ones can do it. And there are studies showing that they had a test group rinsing oral cavity with chlorhexidine, which is broad spectrum antimicrobial, and a control group. And then this test group actually could not reduce this nitrate anymore, and they didn't have the beneficial effect on blood pressure.
Right. So rinsing with a broad spectrum mouthwash could increase my blood pressure.
Indirectly, yes.
Indirectly, yes. Absolutely amazing. So carrying on with the food and drink theme, beverages, so tea and coffee and their effect on the oral microbiome. What do we know about that?
Well, there are studies looking at the different substances. We know that tea, for instance, has a lot of these polyphenols and a lot of antimicrobial substances, also fluorides in green tea. So a lot of chemical active compounds. So we call them functional foods. The same goes for cranberries, which have been shown to have anti-biofilm activity. Also shiitake mushrooms, all kinds of stuff. We've also done research on extracting these substances and testing. So yes, there are products containing these plant or food-based compounds used already in some oral care products. So I think there's still a lot of possibilities because they're definitely friendlier to your microbiome than these aggressive antimicrobials.
So what about smoking and vapes and the oral microbiome?
Oh, there we go. No, don't do that. Don't smoke and don't replace smoking with vaping because the effects will be the same. It really damages your microbiome. There's really elegant study done by a group of Purnima Kumar in Ohio State University. And what they did, they looked at people without any oral diseases, but they compared smokers, former smokers, and current smokers. And they actually looked at their microbes below the gum line, so in this crevice. And what they found that the smokers had microbiome which was really already dysbiotic. It looked like as if they already had this periodontal disease. Well, there was no disease, but microbes already were very, very towards that state. So don't do it. That's what I already mentioned, that for periodontal disease, one of the risk factors is smoking.
Yeah. What about alcohol?
Yeah, alcohol. Alcohol, I think a lot of alcohol is not good for anything and also not for your oral cavity because some bacteria can metabolize some molecules from alcohol. I think it's acetaldehyde, and that can be cancerogenic. So you don't want to have those molecules swimming around in your body. And yeah, oral bacteria happen to be able to make those.
And when we're talking about toxins, we don't usually think of medications as toxins, but when we talk about human microbiomes, it often is the case that various commonly taken medications can be very disruptive to our human microbiomes. Is that the case for the oral microbiomes?
There's not very much research done. There's research on antibiotics. So we know that, well, our own group, we did study a large EU project that antibiotics, we were looking at effects in oral cavity and in the gut, the same individuals. They were healthy and they were followed for 1 year after antibiotic exposure. And we saw that the gut really showed severe destruction of the microbiome, while in oral cavity, it stayed stable. But those are healthy individuals. If you would have a disease and you would have repeated antibiotic courses, then we definitely would see that oral cavity also will collapse. And we do see that there is a loss of diversity and the beneficial bacteria are gone and these opportunistic pathogens can take overhand. So yes, there are effects which are certainly not beneficial.
So we have one interesting question about intimate relationships. So kissing and oral sex and its effect on the oral microbiome. Has that been researched? Do we know anything about that?
Oh, this is a very interesting question. I was searching on this, and I know that there is one study done in Amsterdam when they opened the world's only microbe museum. It's called Micropia. And by opening this museum, they asked couples entering the park, are they a couple? And if so, are they kissing intimately? And yes, when they say yes, they ask them if they want to participate in the study. So what they did, they took a sample from the oral cavity before they kissed from the both partners, and then they asked them to do the French kiss, the very intimate kiss. And then they took another sample. And then they also asked one of the partners to rinse with probiotic containing a drink and then again kiss the partner. So then they compared all these different samples. So the conclusion was, well, if you are a couple, you don't really share a lot of microbes. Not in that small study, they couldn't find it. And once you have your mouth full of these probiotic microbes and 5 minutes later you kiss somebody, you transfer part of them, but this part was very, very small and disappeared very quickly. So again, it shows that what's in your mouth is protecting you from all the things passing by. It will change if something happens to your general health. If your immune system is malfunctioning, if you are having some immune system suppressive therapy, it will be different. So definitely, if you are healthy and nothing is strange, then you're perfectly safe kissing whoever you want. But of course, do it safely. All other forms of sex, I couldn't find any studies on that, how it affects oral cavity, but I did find that oral microbes has been found in vaginal flora of women who have vaginosis. So again, that it disturbs microbes at the different sites in the body. So yeah, it can have both ways some effect.
Now, finally, there was just one question here on the impact of cosmetic procedures. So it's braces, and dentures, fillings. Do we know anything about the effect of those on the oral microbiome?
Well, there's also a lot of research ongoing, especially these clear liners, like this new kind of braces which you just carry. So I'm very curious what that does to ecosystem. But the braces we know actually do not so much, except that they allow accumulation of biofilm much more than without braces. That's what I already mentioned earlier, that these people have difficulties keeping everything meticulously clean, and there are these plaque retention sites due to the physical brace itself, and that's why this biofilm can remain there unnoticed and can start damage your tooth enamel. So then you have to really need some help. Some professional needs to help you clean it. So that's the only thing. And when you remove braces, we see that microbiome returns back to what it was, because you can clean again everything very easily. And normally when the teeth are in correct shape, it even gets better than before you had braces.
Oh, Professor Zaura, thank you so much for sharing your incredible knowledge with us today. It's really clear, and it should be to the listeners, that this community of beneficial microbes that live and work in our mouths are vital to so many aspects of our general health. And your work has made such a significant contribution to this fascinating area of medicine. I shall be watching what you do next with great interest. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Well, thank you for picking up this topic, finally, and thank you for having me.
Thanks to the listeners for tuning in to this episode of Microbiome Medics. Stay curious, keep flossing, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Microbiome Medics podcast. We really hope you enjoyed the content, and we welcome your feedback. We'd love to hear any suggestions you might have for microbiome topics that you'd like us to cover, and we also appreciate listeners' questions and will endeavour to answer them in the next podcast.